Welcome to God. This is George Ortega and Joshua Bond. This is episode number 36. We're recording it on Friday, December 11th at 6:09 p.m. Eastern Time. And, we're going to continue with this series that's designed to help the world come to an accurate understanding of God. The way we understand God today causes so much harm, so much. For example, the way we understand God today is that God is not sovereign, God is not omnipotent, that basically what we do is completely up to us and God can't stop us from doing or thinking, what we want to. That mistaken notion wreaks havoc on our society. So basically, by understanding God properly, we are creating a much better world for ourselves and for future generations.
Yeah, George, we've talked a lot about how this issue of free will being an illusion goes hand in hand with this idea that God is everything, God is in control, and which includes God saying in Isaiah that he creates good and creates evil. And so, these things go hand in hand in such a way that it's hard to get one piece without the other. It's hard to free ourselves from, for most of us, a lifetime of dogmatic views of God that exploit these ideas and kind of cover them up and kind of, skirt around them. That leaves us blaming ourselves and blaming each other for things that we had no control of. We feel we've had control of it, but this is an illusion, and you can make somebody feel they have control of almost anything if the culture supports that idea, even though it's completely wrong.
Right. And there are many, many benefits to more accurately understanding God. But again, like this belief in free will, it's pervasive. It's what our world operates on. And if our world is operating on this profoundly mistaken, harmful notion, and it's because our world doesn't properly understand God, again, you can see the importance of this series. I think, basically to present this idea of our not having a free will without also including the component that it's not our will, but rather God's will that controls anything. That's difficult. That's, I think, perhaps more difficult for people to understand and accept. Again, I think the excuse me, the issue of God being evil, in addition to just good, is something that's challenging also. But again, we need to arrive at this understanding.
Yeah, George. Let's see if we can soften this for people, because I think it has to be kind of softened uh, to slowly accept, so you can come into a full understanding of it. And I'm not very good at that, but one way important that's helped me is to realize that even the concept of evil and morality is hugely variable between cultures. So we might have this idea of evil or morality that we just couldn't attribute to God, because our identity, our nation, our news, our churches are so tied to that being just so evil and wrong. But in another culture, that's just not that big of a deal, and they view something that, something very severely evil that we take lighthearted, and that has helped me a lot to understand that.
Absolutely. Like, for example, in China, they eat dogs. And you think that's really horrible. In the United States, we eat pigs, and pigs are more intelligent than dogs, and that means they probably feel more pain. So the idea is like, when we understand that our morality is coming from God, we can, and that we don't have a free will, we can say to ourselves, well, no, if I had a free will, I would not be doing things that are wrong, and other people wouldn't be doing things that are wrong. So just it provides an explanation, for so much, that again, like even in the Bible, Paul talking to the Romans, he's saying to them, I don't know what's going on. I want to do what's right, but I can't. And so again, so like what religions haven't understood until now, and again, the importance of this series is that yes, we don't have a free will. It is all God's will. And by that, we can just basically address these different confusions and the problems they cause, one by one.
Yeah, George, certainly. And I think that's what happens so often that I observe is, you know, people kind of repress it. I do this a lot. I just yelled at George earlier because I was doing this actually. And, you know, we don't talk about it. Just like with mental illness in this country, it's such a stigma, you know, that it's embarrassing to talk about or it's shameful. When talking about it, it helps you explore it, helps you understand it, helps you understand the causality of what's causing it, understand God and God's causality, right? And so, you know, with all issues, I mean, you know, mental illness and legal issues, right, and relationship issues, and you know, and not just the downers in life, but also the opportunity, right? So much more opportunity and potential human beings have if we would explore it more freely.
Yeah, and I want to address this mental illness component because it's very telling. In other words, like Abraham, Moses, the people who first discovered God, who God first spoke with, the prophets, the Jewish prophets, the Christian prophets, they all heard the voice of God. Not all of them, perhaps, but the vast majority. And in our depraved, unenlightened, unspiritual world, we actually label these people as mentally ill. I mean, granted, some of them are confused. They don't understand that every thought they're hearing the voice of is coming from God. But at least, in a certain way, you can even, yeah, they're probably closer to the prophets who created Judaism and Christianity and Islam and Hinduism as other people. So like that's, and that, that misattribution, that misdiagnosis comes from a lack of a proper understanding, and not just of God, but how our religions developed. Sorry.
Oh, that's great, George. And you know, I love that issue, that this, and I think it is very relevant to God, because you see what happens is basically these models of reality, or acceptable or not acceptable forms of consciousness or human behavior or altered states, right? Whatever the official story is, has traditionally come from religion. And that's traditionally been stamped with the approval of the priest who's claiming to hear from God, right? So, you know, you can see how there's a threat of competition, that you gotta, you want to be able to declare certain people crazy if they're coming up with new ideas, and declare your crazy ideas as coming from God. And if you have the authority of being a priest, then you can get away with that.
Yeah. So again, getting back to the free will thing, it's like, no, it's not symptomatic of a major mental illness to hear things, because we all, like, think about it. The difference between people who are diagnosed with auditory hallucinations and with other people is that, like, what we hear in thoughts, whereas they have the thoughts basically take the form of voices, which again is more similar to the prophetic version. But the key point here is that it's all coming from God. God is communicating to us in different ways, just like God communicates different messages to different religions at different times. It's so important to understand the proper attributes of God to understand these kinds of dynamics.
Yeah, George. And I mean, this is why I think we talk about consciousness quite a bit, find ourselves talking about consciousness quite a bit on the show. You know, this idea of consciousness that we've held for a long time, or has been, the official story that's not true, has done a lot of damage. And it's gone hand in hand with this ability to condemn that consciousness, and say it's evil, say you have an evil soul, it deserves to go to hell. And actually, the etymology, the root of consciousness, just as late as the 16th, 17th century, consciousness was all about morality. It had nothing to, they only used it for describing morality, of being wrong, condemnable, culpable consciousness, right? It wasn't used in this broader context like we use it today, but we still carry that baggage, right? And I think that is such an important aspect to understand for getting all of this.
Okay, again, to properly understand who we are as human beings, it's indispensable that we understand our relation to God. That, and again, we're not speculating about a God that people have not heard about or don't understand. The God we're referring to is the God that is described in the Old Testament and the New Testament. For example, like a lot of people don't want to accept that God can do anything that's not all good. But you just go to Isaiah, where God is telling Isaiah, I create good, I create evil. And it's all over. I mean, like there's so many natural disasters that I'm not sure you could blame people for that happen. So like it's very important to understand that yes, God is both evil and good and evil. But fortunately, I think we're designed to live better and better lives.
Yeah, George, you brought up a very important point. Something else unfortunate that these more shame-based versions of Abrahamic religions have done to kind of cover up this true reality of causality is this false dichotomy between human evil and natural evil, right? And then, the first premise is, well, they explained God as only good and, purely omnibenevolent, right? And so then how could a good and loving God allow there to be evil, right? And then the conclusion was, well, humans are the cause of evil, and that's how they justified creating this idea of burning in hell for eternity, right? But they don't address this with that. When it's addressed, they don't talk about the natural evil, right?
Yeah, and it's, for example, just like I think in both Jewish and Christian theology, a person has to be at a certain age of accountability to be held accountable for anything. So like, a lot of, sometimes terrible things happen to babies who are 3 months old or 6 months old or something. And you can't attribute that you can't say, well, no, that baby did something to deserve that. So this is naturally just one example of many of God, for whatever reason, choosing to afflict, a person independent of the person having deserved it for doing some indiscretion. And again, religion needs to understand this. Yes, it's not, ideally it'd be great if God was all good, but ideally it might be great if we lived forever. We just have to understand the world within which we live and navigate it as best we can.
Yeah. I think we've got a lot of healing to do from this, and it's hard to, you know, just like our concept of morality and evil and good and bad, or, even politics is largely culturally constructed, almost completely culturally constructed. If we don't hear a story about something, then we don't even know how to think about it. We don't even, thought doesn't even enter our mind. But as we start to talk about this more and more, and the information about free will being an illusion and all these pieces are put together, I think we're going to come to this realization that so much of our bad behavior, sin essentially was a self-fulfilling prophecy. It was blaming people, making people feel bad about themselves, and then that caused them to do bad things, right? And I think that we're going to realize as we heal from this more and more and come into a greater self-love, self-acceptance, and love of others through this, we're going to find great healing, and a lot of people are going to find explanations for their behavior that they didn't have before.
Yeah, and I want to address, perhaps the quintessential question of our existence. I mean, like, why there's a reality. That's an interesting question, but I think the more salient question for us as sentient beings, we feel pleasure, we feel pain, is like, why, if God is all powerful, forget the all goodness stuff. God designed us to seek pleasure, avoid pain. We're hedonic creatures. So why, and not just us, like so many other living beings, why would God have created pain and suffering in the first place? And this is one of the things that, I don't think religion has grappled with it sufficiently, and to understand God. We may not get an answer to that, but I think it's very important to keep asking the question.
Yeah, George. For me, where I'm at with it, and this may change over time, it has changed before for me. This concept of what they call the theodicy. How come can a good God permit evil, much less suffering for no reason, right? For me, I come at it from this same resentment that some religions blame the individual. They ignore the evidence for the free will being an illusion. They condemn the self. They're self-hate, self-condemnatory religions. They obviously have very nice words to say it, so we don't catch on. Um, and so for me, I take the same respect for self and same love for the self and apply it to consciousness. So I appreciate that people have the ability in their consciousness to experience God, and I value that more than some dogmatic version of God, even if it's my own. This is how God is. This is what God is. I like to. I find the value in our ability to celebrate and experience God in our mind, however that may be for each person.
Yeah, and it's important. For example, artists experience God through art, athletes through sports. We have different ways of experiencing God, but just like there's a way of understanding this physical world correctly, the laws of nature and all, and by doing that, we can create many wondrous things. By properly understanding God, just in some ways we can experience God differently, but it really would benefit our world to properly, as we did in episodes 3 through 7, understand the accurate nature of God, understand that God must logically and scientifically exist.
Yeah, certainly, because look how much damage has been done with a false bad understanding of God and not accepting the illusion of free will, how much self-hate and probably wars have been started. And so let me elaborate a little bit more how this all plays out for me, or my kind of view on it, is that, um, drew a blank, is that, right, if somehow, just hypothetically, tomorrow scientists prove the God of the Bible, even the God as we define it, doesn't exist. Can't happen, obviously, but if they did, would I say, okay, that's it, let's burn down all the churches, let's get rid of them, no more God, let's make a law against God because we've just proved that God doesn't exist? No, I wouldn't do that, because there's so much value in people's ability to experience God, even if we prove that their version is completely wrong. So as long as they're not harming people, starting wars, and hopefully they'll stop, spreading this self-hate version of the sin doctrine and the free will doctrine. But if we can get that under control, then that's how I come at it, to really, really value God consciousness.
Yeah, and another reason we're doing this series is that, religion is our moral institution. We have commerce, but they're guided by profits. Academia tends to be amoral. They just want information. It's only among our world's institutions, it's religions who grapple with the challenges of morality. And what happens is, like, the more intelligent people are leaving religion, because that religions, the religions today, the leaders have such a skewed, mistaken understanding of God and of reality. So the hope is by restoring that proper understanding, will bring more intelligent people back into religion and evolve the religion so that we can do much more good.
Yeah, George. And I take it a step further. Even, I'm a big believer in separation of church and state. I mean, there might be a few examples where we would have been better off if that part of government, was intertwined with religion. Maybe, I don't know, but for the most part, I believe in the separation of church and state. But I believe that the spirituality in these institutions, they're spiritually devoid, right? And so, they're all doing battle with Satan, essentially. They're doing battle with their own ego. And this is why there's so much corruption in politics, even in science. They're so biased, academia for sure. is struggling. So I think there needs to be some type of hybrid where there is spirituality and really this understanding of God and this definition of God that we bring and we're offering on this show really would fit that kind of model that would kind of shore those things up, I think.
Yeah, because I mean, people go to religion for truth. If people are going, for example, to churches, synagogues, where they're preaching this gospel of free will, if anybody's like halfway educated in neuroscience, physics, basic psychology, the unconscious in consciousness, people understand that no, that's not accurate. And so but again, religions are closest, I think, to God. The people who are members of congregations, in certain ways, they are very close to God. And so to give them a more accurate understanding of God, I think, is to help them, to help them. For many congregations believe that suffering is almost like a desired aspect of life. And understanding God properly requires or just invites the understanding that no, God doesn't really want that.
Yeah, certainly, George. And again, across all the institutions, um, they're all failing us and they're failing and they're being dishonest about it. I have the statistics that I go to, 50% of STEM students are dropping out. 90% of businesses end up failing, which is a huge, enormous loss to the economy. We'd all be much more wealthy if that didn't happen. There's many more, right? So, I think a lot of it comes with, them being humans trying to create spiritually devoid, totally secular institutions. There has to be some way, some capacity for the individuals, and when there's an offer for a bribe, or you can market your product a little more heavier than it should be, some spiritual mechanism that keeps them from doing that. And yeah, I think we're missing that.
I think, and when you talk about that, and basically talking about any of our sociological problems or problems as individuals, we're seeking answers in each other. So with any one of these questions, why is this? Why aren't we doing this? Why are we doing this? If we reframe it, why is God making this happen? We're not going to apply the same kinds of reasonings to God as we apply to ourselves as human beings, because God is categorically a different being, omniscient, omnipotent. So I think that may actually shifting the exploration from why are we doing this? Why are they doing this? To why is God doing this? I think, that reflects basically what this show is about.
Yeah, George. I think there's kind of a in between there, and that's asking the question: did our previous version of God, our understanding of God, did it allow this or even facilitate this? I mean, there's deeply religious people, for instance, on both sides of the political aisle, that have completely different views, but they have an idea of God that supports that, right? And so I think, what we are doing through this is kind of transcendental of all of it, of exploring new ideas of God and how to embrace them and how to make amends for, the fallacies that have been accepted, embraced, or propagandized in the past. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just God, just compelling large groups of people to believe one thing and compelling large groups of people to believe an exact opposite thing. I mean, this is kind of like the Tower of Babel, like the people back then thought they were doing something really great, creating this tower to go reach up to the heavens. God isn't pleased, so again, like attributing what happens to God, I believe, helps us better understand the mind of God. We can, like if we see this from a human perspective, we have human motivations for why we do things. But when we shift the question to why is God doing the, whatever it is that's making things less perfect than they could be, they should be, then I think, across the board, regardless of what we're exploring, I think we can come up with answers that are much more accurate and that can help us resolve and improve whatever issue we're addressing.
Yeah, for me, again, it comes really in my own life, speaking personally, does come back to this self-concept that I end up with as a result, or that's largely affected with, my view of God or the view of God that's, taught to me or whatever. And I think that's where a lot of the healing has to happen for, our country and our world. Um, and we have all the science, ironically the science is ahead of the religions on this concept of God. They don't call it God, but they've, there's hundreds and thousands of psychology studies and neuroscience studies that proves free will is an illusion. Even the secular philosophers, ironically, the secular and the atheist philosophers are ahead of the religious philosophers on this. And it just blows my mind how we got to this point. But I think that's the work of the show that we're doing, why we're called to do it.
Yeah, and something that's very new to our world, to our humanity, like a couple of hundred years ago, one could say, well, religion has done so much evil in the world, and science is really like our savior. Science has done so much good. All right, until about 30 years ago now, 20, 10 years ago to today, we can no longer say that, because like science divorced from religion, from a proper understanding of God and our moral virtues and our moral responsibilities, has created this climate change that is threatening to destroy the civilization we know. So again, that's a direct consequence of moving forward with science without the proper moral foundation that comes from an accurate and complete, devoted, really, understanding of God.
Yeah, George. Again, it seems to be that spiritual element that was, you know, forsaken, right? And so that science could say, well, we just make the science, we just make the discoveries, but that's capitalism, or that's the market that sells them, that's responsible for climate change. We're not responsible for climate change, or whatever the issue is, right? And I mean, that's just such a nonsensical way of thinking. I mean, we need a whole systems-wide approach. And that's what religion has always been, an attempt to have systems theories, systems understandings for the to make the best possible community, and to know God and to understand God and understand causality and be integrated across the whole community. And this is only a recent version of religion that's really doing this. But that's all the time we have for today. We'll see you tomorrow on God.